Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Alice in Storyland. I'm your host, Alice, and today we will actually be mixing it up a little bit and reading a ghost story. Maybe two, depending on how much time we have. The book is called In Quest of Ghosts. It's by Hans Holzer. I was informed, little constructive criticism, super appreciated, to drink more and record less. Therefore, that's what we'll be doing this week. So, without further ado, this week's wine is Sixth Sense, perfect for a ghost story. I have my little skull mug because I'm cute like that. And I will be doing my best to drink more and record less. Not bad. Not great. Not bad. So the ghost story we'll be reading today is The Haunting at Glen, Cove. Castles, palaces, even churches, and of course, cemeteries. Those are places one expects to be haunted. But an elegant, expensive school? Never mind. Schools can be as haunted as Morgan Hall, for instance. I don't know what Morgan Hall is. I don't know where Morgan Hall is. When Alice was born, her parents moved into an old house in Brooklyn. She's named after me, or vice versa. Alice was only a few months old when they left again, but during those months she would not be taken into her mother's bedroom without a fierce struggle, a behavior so markedly different from her otherwise good behavior as a baby, that could not be helped but be noticed by parents. While her father had no interest in such matters, her mother soon connected the child's strange behavior with the other strange things in the house. The doors would be opened by themselves, the footsteps, the strange drafts, especially that little bedroom that little Alice hated so much. Why would you not be interested in this? What kind of matters do you have to attend to that are not haunted? When Alice was about 12 years old, and the family had moved from the old neighborhood into another house, she all of a sudden one day found herself thinking of her grandmother. Her grandparents lived a distance away upstate, and there had been no recent contact with them. "Grandmother is dead," Alice said to her mother, matter-of-factly. Her mother stared at her in disbelief. Hours later the telephone rang. Grandmother, who had been in excellent health, had suddenly passed away. I'm going to take a brief pause here and let you know how much I hate children because they are terrifying, especially when there's the supernatural involved. Her mother gave the girl a queer look, but she had only known of such gifts and realized her daughter, an only child, was something special. Within 6 months the telephone rang twice more. The first time, Alice looked up and said, "Grandfather's dead." And then, "Uncle's dead." And they were. While her father shook his head over all of this foolishness, her mother did not scoff at her daughter's powers, especially after Alice had received a dream warning from her dead grandmother, advising her of an impending car accident. She was shown the exact location where it would happen, and told that if her mother were to sit in front, she were to be badly hurt, but if Alice were to change places with her, Alice would not be so badly hurt. After the dream, without telling her mother for her reasons, she insisted on changing places with her on the trip. Sure enough, the car was hit by another automobile. Had her mother been where Alice sat, she might not have reacted quickly enough and been badly hurt. But Alice was prepared and ducked, and received only a whiplash. Afterwards, she discussed all of this with her mother. Her mother did not scoff, but asked what her grandmother, who had given them warning, had looked like in the vision. She had on a house dress and bedroom slippers," Alice replied. Her mother nodded. Although the grandmother had lost both legs due to diabetes, she had been buried with her favorite bedroom slippers in the coffin. please, for the love of God, don't bury me with bedroom slippers. Alice had neither seen or known this. When she was 17, Alice had a strong urge to become a nun. She felt the world outside had little to offer and began to consider entering a convent. Perhaps this inclination was planted in her mind when she was a camp counselor for a Catholic school on Long Island. She liked the serenity of the place and apparently quiet, contemplative life of the sisters. On her very first visit to the convent, however, she felt uneasy. Morgan Hall, we get to find out what it is a magnificently appointed mansion in Glen, Cove, Long Island, that had only been converted to religious purposes some years ago. Prior to that, it was the Morgan estate, with all that the name of the wealthy family implies. Nothing about it was either ugly or frightening in the least. Yet Alice felt immediately terrified when entering its high-ceilinged corridors. I just want to point out that high-ceilinged is a thing, but you don't understand how weird the word ceilinged looks until it's spelled out for you, because it looks weird. Ceilinged. As a prospective postulant, she had to visit the place several times prior to being accepted, and, on each occasion, her uneasiness mounted. But as she ascribed these feelings to her lack of familiarity within the new place, one night her uncle and grandfather appeared in a dream. They told her that everything would be all right. She took this as encouragement to pursue her religious plans, and shortly after formally entered the convent. She moved in just days before her 18th birthday, looking forward to a life totally different from that of her friends and schoolmates. The room she was assigned adjoined one of the cloisters, but at first she was alone in it, as her future roommate was to arrive a week late. Thus she spent her first days at Morgan Hall alone in the room. The very first night, after she had retired, she heard someone walking up and down the outside of the door. She thought this strange at the hour of the night, knowing full well that convents like their people to retire early. Finally, her curiosity overcame her natural shyness of being in a new place, and she peeked out of the door into the corridor. The footsteps were still audible, but there was no one walking about on the outside. Quickly, she closed the door and went to bed. That's what I would have done. The next morning, she discussed the matter with 6 other postulants in rooms nearby. They, too, had heard the footsteps in the night. In fact, they had heard them on many other nights as well, when there was positively no one walking on the outside. As she got used to convent routine, Alice realized how impossible it would be for one of them, or even one of the novices, who had been there a little longer than they, to walk around the place at that hour of the night when she heard the steps. Rigid convent rules included a 10 p.m. bell. Everybody had to be in bed at that time, except for the dire emergencies. One didn't just walk about the corridors at midnight or later for the sheer fun of it. One does not just enter Mordor. All lights go out at 10, and nothing moves. At first, Alice thought the novices were playing tricks on the new arrivals by walking around downstairs to create the footsteps, perhaps to frighten the postulants in their way to college freshmen are often hazed by their elder colleagues. But soon she realized that this was not so, that the novices were no more allowed out after 10 than they were. Her psychic past did not allow Alice to let the matters rest, and curiosity forced her to further inquire as best she could under the circumstances. After all, you don't run into Mother Superior and ask, "Who walks the corridors at night, ma'am?" It was then that she learned that the house had been J.P. Morgan's mansion originally, and later had been used by the Russian embassy. She recalled the battles that the Russians had fought with the Glen Cove township over taxes, and how they had finally vacated the premises in less than perfect condition. And as a sort of anticlimax, the Catholic nuns had moved in and turned the hall into a convent and a school. A conversation with the convent librarian wasn't particularly fruitful either. Yes, Mr. Morgan built the house in 1910. No, he didn't die here. He died in Spain. Why did she want to know? Alice wondered about Mr. Morgan's daughter. Alice Morgan. Is everyone named Alice? Everyone is named Alice. Alice Morgan had lived in this house and died here of typhoid fever in the early years of her life. But try as she might, she never got the librarians to tell her anything helpful. Naturally, Alice did not wish to bring upon the real reason for her curiosity, but it seemed as if the librarian sensed something about it, for she curtly turned her head sideways when speaking of the Morgans, as if she did not wish to answer. Frustrated in her inquiry, Alice returned to her chores. One night in October of 1965, Alice was walking the hall of the postulancy, that part of the building reserved for the new girls who were serving their apprenticeship prior to being admitted to the convent and taking their final vows. It was a cool night, and Alice had walked fairly briskly to the extreme end of the hall, and then stopped for a moment to rest. As she turned around and faced the opposite end of the hall when she had just come, she noticed a girl standing there who had not been there before. She wore a long black dress similar to the dresses the postulants wore, and Alice took her to be her roommate. She noticed the figure enter the room at the end of the hall. This room was not a bedroom, but used by the postulants for study purposes. "It's Vera," Alice thought, and decided to join her and see what she was up to in that room. Quickly she walked towards the room and entered it. The lights were off, and Alice thought this peculiar. Was her roommate friend perhaps playing games with her? The room at this hour was quite dark, so she turned on the lights and looked around. There was no one in the room now, and there was no way anyone could have left the room without her noticing, Alice reasons. She examined the windows and found them tightly closed. Not that she expected her friend to exit the room that way, but she wanted to be sure the person, whoever that might have been, could not have left that way. This was the 3rd floor, and anyone trying to leave by the windows would have had to jump or have a ladder outside. Suddenly, it hit Alice that she had not heard anything at all. All the time she had seen the figure walk into the room, there had been no footsteps, no noise of a door opening, nothing. Hate. Morgan Hall's doors opened with a fair amount of squeaking, and none of that was audible when she had seen the figure. Alice quickly left and hurried to her own room to figure this out quickly. On recollection, she had visualized the figure again, and it occurred to her at once that there was something very odd about the girl. For one thing, the long gowns the postulants wear moves when they walk. But the figure she had seen was stiff and seemed to glide along the corridor rather than actually walk upon it. The hallway was properly lit, and she had seen the figure quite clearly. What she had not seen were her ankles and socks, something she would have observed had it been one of her friends. And although the door was closed, the room actually was a corner room that could be entered in only one way from the front door. Alice was sure she had not seen the figure emerge from it again. There was no place to hide in the room. Had this been her roommate playing a joke on her? Alice quickly examined the closet, desk, and beds, and no one was hiding anywhere in the room. Eventually, she gathered up enough courage to seek out her friend Vera and discuss the matter with her. She found that there was a joke going around in the convent that Alice Morgan's ghost was roaming the corridors, but the whole matter was treated strictly as a gag. Yet she also discovered that there was one part of the hall that was off limits to anyone alone. In what the girls called the catacombs, a ground level, was the laundry room. I will never wash my clothes in a place called the catacombs. Like, I'll just be dirty. The end. The third section, way back, was never to be entered by any of them at night, and in the daytime only if in pairs. Yet, the area was well lit. Alice could not get any information for the reasons for this strange and forbidding order. In a convent, speaking to anyone but one's own group is extremely difficult without proper permission, and this was not a fitting subject to discuss. The novices, whom she approached next, suddenly became serious and told her to forget it. There were things going on in the building that could not be explained. She was not to pay attention and pray hard instead. Alice wondered about this attitude, and perhaps it was then her first doubts concerning her ecclesiastical future began to enter her mind. Shortly after, it was still October 1965, she lay awake in bed, thinking of her future at the convent. The clock had just chimed 11, and she was still wide awake. Night after night, she had heard walking in the hall. After weeks of these manifestations, her nerves began to get edgy, and she could not sleep as easily as she used to when she still lived in Brooklyn. Sure enough, there they were again, those incessant footsteps. They seemed to her the steps of a medium-heavy person, more like a woman than a man, and they seemed to be bent on some definite business, scurrying along the hall as if in a hurry. Pause if you hear outside noise. It's definitely my cat again. Suddenly the night was pierced by a shriek. It seemed directly outside her door, but below. Directly outside her door, but below. Since she was on the top floor, the person would have to be on the second floor. There was no mistaking it. This was the outcry of a woman in great pain, in the agony of being hurt by someone. This time she was almost scared to look. But she did open the door, only to find the corridor abandoned and quiet now. She ran in to speak to the older postulants, regulations or no regulations. She found them huddled in their beds in abject fear. All 8 of them had heard the blood-curdling scream. By now, Alice was convinced that something strange had taken place here, and that a restless personality was stalking the corridors. I just want to point out real quick, I much prefer this main character to the last book we're reading. She's so much more badass. A short time later, she and Vera were in their room getting ready to retire. It was a cold night, but no wind was about. The windows were the French type that locked with a heavy iron rod from top to bottom. No one could open the window from the outside. The only way it could be opened would be from the inside, by pushing the rod up. We don't have to lock the window tonight, do we? Vera asked. It isn't windy. But they decided to do it anyway, as they did every night. They put their shoes on the windowsill, something they were in the habit of doing frequently, so the small draft coming in below would air them out. After the window was locked, they retired. It was well into the night when the girls awoke to a loud noise. The French window had broken open by itself, and the shoes had been tossed aside in the room as if by a strong storm. They checked and found the air outside totally still. Whatever had burst their window open had not been the wind. But what was it? The room was ice cold now. They shuddered and went back to bed. There was only a small ledge for pigeons to sit on outside the window. Psst. So small no one could have opened it from that vantage point, and one could hardly expect pigeons to burst from There was only a small ledge for pigeons to sit on outside the window, so no one could have opened it from that vantage point, and no one could hardly expect pigeons to burst the window open. The girls then realized that the novices, who had been complaining about the windows in their room being consistently opening, had not been fibbing. Alice and Vera always kept their windows closed, yet some unforeseen force had apparently opened them from inside on a number of occasions. Now they had seen for themselves and how it had happened. I am highly regretting this drink more, record less thing. Highly. Alice realized that the windows had been broken open as if by force from the inside and not the outside. Someone's trying to get in. Someone's trying to get out, not in, she said, and her roommate could only shudder. I mean, I'm with her roommate on that one. Like, what is in my room that needs to get out of my room? I am not okay with this. There were other peculiar things she soon noticed. Strange cold drafts upstairs and in the attic. Crosses nailed to the wall next to the entrance of the upstairs rooms. Only to those rooms and to no others, and not inside the rooms as one might expect in a convent, but just outside as if they had been placed there to keep something or someone evil out. In the main dining hall, a door, when closed, could not be distinguished from the front wall. A trick window near the table was actually a mirror that allowed the man at the head of the table to see who was coming towards him from all sides. Banker Morgan. I'm really hoping his name is not Banker and that's just a title. Because can you imagine a baby being named Banker? Here's my infant Banker. Banker Morgan lived in considerable fear of his life, whether imagined or real, but certainly the house was built to his specifications. In fact, trick mirrors were placed in various parts of the main house, so no one could approach from the downstairs and surprise anyone upstairs. Yet no one could detect anyone watching them through them. Shortly after Alice had moved into the convent, she began having strange dreams in which a blonde girl, also named Alice, played a prominent role. In the dream, the girl's blonde hair changed to curls, and Alice heard a voice that said, This is Alice Morgan. I want to introduce you to her." But when she woke up, Alice thought this was only due to her having discussed the matter with the other novices. Alice Morgan was not the disturbed person there, her psychic sense told her. To her, all ghostly activity centered around that of the attic. There were 2 steps that always squeaked peculiarly when someone stepped on them. Many times she would hear them squeak and look to see who was walking on them, only to find herself staring into nothingness. Fuck that. This was in the daytime. On other occasions, when she was at work cleaning garbage cans downstairs, postulants do a lot of ordinary kitchen work, she would feel herself observed closely by a pair of eyes staring down at her from the attic. Yet no one was up there then. The torture of the nightly footsteps together with her doubts about her own calling prompted her to finally seek release from the convent and return to the outside world after 3 months as a postulant. I thought this was a lot longer than 3 months. This felt like a lot longer than 3 months, but I guess it's only 3 months. After she had made this difficult decision, after 3 months, that ain't difficult. Go, boo, go, run! She felt almost as if all the burdens had lifted from the room, that had been the center of the psychic manifestations. She decided to make some final inquiries prior to her leaving, and since her superiors would not tell her, she looked the place over by herself, talked to those who were willing to talk, and otherwise used her powers of observation. She decided to make them She decided to make some final inquiries prior to leaving, and since her superiors would not tell her, she looked over the place by herself. I already said this. Surely, if the haunted area was upstairs, and she knew that by now that it could not be Alice Morgan who was the restless one. But then who was it? The rooms on the third floor had originally been servant quarters, as it is customary in the mansions of the pre-World War I period. They were built to house the unusually large staffs of the owners. In the case of the Morgans, that staff was even larger than most wealthy families. Gee, that would be nice. I'm not asking for a lot. I'm just asking for, like, one person to come clean my house that isn't me. But, that requires money, and I am not rich like these people clearly are. In the case of the Morgans, that staff was even larger than most wealthy families. Lucky bitches. Was the restless one of the maids who had jumped out the window in a final burst of freedom? Freedom from some horrible thing. One of the maids? Did I miss a whole segment where we found out that people just jumped out the window? Did I fucking miss that? Then her thoughts turned to the communist Russian occupancy of the building. Had they perhaps tortured someone up there in her room? The thought was melodramatically tempting. Well, at least they admit that shit. But she dismissed it immediately. You go, girl. The figure she had seen in the hall was dressed in the long dress of an earlier period. She belonged to a time when Morgan Hall was a mansion. No, she reasoned. It must have been a young girl who died there while the Morgans headed the place, and perhaps her death was hushed up, and she wanted it known. Was it suicide? And did she feel in some kind of a personal hell because of it? Especially now that the place was a convent. Yeah, that would suck. Somehow, Alice felt that she had stumbled upon the right answers. That night, the last night she was to spend at the convent prior to going home, she slept soundly. For the first time in 3 months, there were no footsteps outside her door. She waited for a while once the 10 o'clock bell had sounded, but nothing happened. Whoever it was had stopped walking. That's the end of it. That's the end of the whole story. So apparently it was someone who committed suicide. And now that it's a convent, could not rest. That's what I gathered from that. I am not entirely sober though, so obviously. So if y'all want to add your comments or what you think happened or how badly this sucked in the comments below, let me know. If you're really mean, I'll probably ignore you, but that's fine. This is mostly for my own amusement anyway. But thank you all for paying attention and listening if you did. And I hope to see you next week with a different, maybe we'll probably either have another ghost story or the next 2 chapters of the Opal Eyed Fan or the next chapter of the Opal Eyed Fan. One of the above. So it was nice to record this, and y'all have a wonderful rest of your day.